excited to celebrate Juneteenth in nature with all of you today. My name is Jessie, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications at Greenbelt Alliance. And for those of you who don't know what we do, our mission is to educate, advocate, and collaborate to ensure the Bay Area's lands and communities are resilient to a changing climate. The work we do to protect the Bay Area's natural and agricultural lands while also creating thriving communities, as well as this free outings program, is made possible by you. So if you can, please donate today, which you can do so securely on our website at greenbelt.org/donate. And during the outing, please feel free to ask questions. We will answer them at the end. So I'll kind of be helping to field that. And I also wanted to just mention that while we're over in the East Bay for today's presentation on Mount Diablo, we have some exciting news from our partners at the East Bay Regional Park District in honor of Juneteenth. They have announced earlier this month that they will be naming the new park that we helped support at the former Concord Naval Weapons Station, that they're naming that park after Black civil rights attorney and US Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. And you can read more about that in the link that I'm going to share in the chat in just a moment. And again, we thank you for joining us and for your patience as we get started a little bit late. We'll make up for time. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ken, our wonderful outings leader. Thank you, Ken.
Well, I think this confusion may be the most exciting part of the morning, but we'll give it a try here. So as fate would have it, it's June 19th, and the solstice, I think, is tomorrow, the summer solstice. And Liz and I usually do a short late afternoon evening walk at Mount Diablo to celebrate the solstice. So this would be the actual day that we had, that we would be doing our boots on the ground outing, just virtually this time. And we started the Mitchell Canyon trailhead, and this is the view driving into the park on a normal year when there's been our usual amount of rain. Unfortunately, if you drive in this year, it doesn't look quite the same, but it's still attractive nonetheless. And at the trailhead, at the parking lot, is the Mitchell Canyon Visitor Center, which is open on Saturdays and Sundays and is a great place to visit. And behind it is the native plant garden with many of the species that you see on Mount Diablo. Anyway, here is our route today. So we start right here, and we head out to Coulter Pond, take a look at the critters that live in the pond, and those of us that survive walk back. And then we take a walk up Mitchell Canyon for about a mile, then head back on the Globally Trail. So we'll try to duplicate that this morning and not lose anybody along the way. Well, this is Coulter Pond as seen from above. Like many of the ponds on Mount Diablo, they're actually, their origin, they were natural riparian ponds, and during the cattle grazing era, they were converted by ranchers into cattle ponds. Now the cattle are gone from Mount Diablo except for a demonstration ranch on the south side, and the ponds persist. And Coulter Pond is particularly, attractive with the oak trees around it, and it's a really nice walk out. And one of the great views that we see looking towards the south is of Twin Peaks. You can see how it got its name. So San Francisco is not the only place with the Twin Peaks, but it's kind of important in Mount Diablo history. So back in the mid-1970s, there was a extreme drought in the Bay Area, not unlike what we've gone through the last few years. There were a lot of dead trees and parched dry vegetation. And the evening of August 1st, 1977, a thunderstorm moved through the Bay Area. And lightning struck about 6:30 in the evening on Twin Peaks and started a fire. And that fire burned for 3 days and 3 nights. Consumed over 3,500 acres. It burned most of the north side here. It burned up Donner Canyon, and the fire went up Back Canyon, and the last day it burned down Mitchell Canyon. And it's important because the original plan, the Mitchell Canyon area became part of the park in the mid 1960s, and then this park a few years later. But the original plan was to put houses all the way up, while it was still private property, to the base of Twin Peaks here. They all would have been burned. It would have been just about impossible to fight the fire with the houses there. It would have burned down into Clayton. So we have, which kind of brings us to, Jesse will mention this at the end, coming up on June 22nd at 4 o'clock, a new view of Greenbelts, wildfire protection and preparedness. And it shows the important role of Greenbelts in building fire, providing for fire resilient communities. So this was kind of an object lesson and all that we get to see every year. And here actually is a view from the top of Twin Peaks. We usually have a wildflower walk there in the springtime, and the area up towards Twin Peaks is one of the wildflower hotspots in the Bay Area. And this is where we have lunch. There's a nice flat spot at the top of Twin Peaks. We try to figure out where that lightning bolt hit, but we get to look up the various canyons of Mount Diablo. So it's one of the best views you can imagine. But back to the pond, after we've made our walk down, we kind of scoot down the trail here and take a look at what lives in the pond. And it happens to be home of three of the most common herps in the Bay Area, 2 amphibians and 1 reptile. And one of the little amphibians is this guy. I learned it as the tree frog, and probably most of you too. The common name is just recently, the preferred common name now is Pacific chorus frog. The herpetologists are almost as bad as the ornithologists with all their lumping and splitting. But either way, either name, people know what you're talking about. And the chorus frog is tiny. If you've ever seen them, they're 1 to 2 inches long, but they're the ones that make that really loud noise at night that some people love and some people can't stand because it keeps them awake. And you might see these chorus frogs green or kind of this brownish color. They have kind of a neat mechanism, a camouflage mechanism. They have branched skin cells with a little bit of dark pigment. And when they need to be green for camouflage, that little bit of dark pigment stays in the center of the skin cell. And when they need to turn brown, it diffuses out into all the little branches. So quite an interesting strategy. Plus, kind of diagnostic for the tree frog. It's got a stripe through the eye. Again, that's for camouflage. And the little pads on its toes. It's a great climber. So when you want to be camouflaged, there's a special kind of word for that. It's called cryptic coloration. Now, cryptic, you want to stay hidden. So that's one strategy. But there's another amphibian that lives in the pond here. It's this guy. This is a western toad. And they can be 5.5 inches long. You're never going to confuse them. They're all kind of warty looking. And this guy's got a big yellow stripe down its back, very easy to recognize. Well, what goes with that? Without that stripe, you might not even see it there. Remember Creature from the Black Lagoon? That would have been a lot scarier if you hadn't been able to see the zipper in the monster costume. Same thing with this guy. But that yellow stripe is there because it wants to be seen. It has the special glands, the parotid glands, the base of its head that exude kind of a foul smelling substance. It's not good eating. So that yellow stripe, that's nature's warning signal. That's to warn off predators. You're going to get a stomach ache if you try to eat me. So that's a different kind of coloration. When you want to be seen, it's called aposematic coloration. And a lot of times we're down there, a lot of nefarious activity going on. It's called amplexus, by the way. Well, I gave these two toads, you can see there's a string of eggs there, so they've been at it for quite a while. I gave them a very stern talking to. I told them we didn't tolerate that kind of licentious behavior on Greenbelt Alliance outings. And if they must, they should go get a room. They promptly did. This is actually a ground squirrel burrow. And they're very important. That's where the toads go and the tree frogs and lots of other critters find refuge in the really hot, dry months of the summer. Some of the burrows have been abandoned. Some still have ground squirrels in them. Our local ground squirrels actually sleep through the hottest months. It's that type of summer hibernation is called estivation. So there's a lot of snoozing going on there, despite some extracurricular activity here. And the way you can tell the difference between the tadpoles, which we sometimes see, the western toad tadpoles are jet black, and Pacific chorus frog tadpoles are this brownish green, and their eyes kind of bulge out from the outline of their head. But you got a 50-50 chance anyway, just say one. There's a few fallen limbs right next to the pond, and kind of shows you the way the attitude of park maintenance people has changed for the better over the years. You know, it used to be at our various parks, if a tree fell down, it would be cleaned up right away. You know, you wanted to have them our parks looking like English gardens. But park people kind of reevaluated, and they realized that down trees are very, very important part of the ecosystem. So now the down trees stay, unless they're falling on a trail and squash somebody, then they have to move them out. But in this case, it's interesting because the fallen limbs are home to our most common reptile. You probably recognize this guy, a western fence lizard, also called the swift because it moves so fast. And of course, the blue belly. The western fence lizards have blue undersides, especially the males, and you might guess you might see them doing push-ups when you walk by, especially if you're wearing a blue shirt. They don't see all that well, and they think you're competition. And the one reason they do those push-ups is to kind of warn off any competitors, show them what a tough guy he is. They also do the push-ups to attract the females. And a few other reasons have been postulated. Remember, these guys are cold-blooded, and that may be a way to thermoregulate, to kind of regulate their body temperature by getting off the hot rocks for a while. Plus, they're down so low, they don't have a very good field of vision. But when they're up about an inch higher, it improves a great deal. So any of those four, probably all four of them, are the reasons for the push-ups. And those of you, well, occasionally you see a western fence lizard like this missing its tail. It's not just because the slide cuts off there either. If a predator grabs a western fence lizard by its tail, there's actually a weak spot in the vertebrae. The tail breaks off and slithers away, hopefully with the predator in pursuit of the tail, while the rest of the lizard makes its getaway. And there are powerful muscles where that joint is. They squeeze closed and close off the blood vessels so the lizard doesn't bleed to death. And then over time, it grows a new tail, a replacement tail. Now, that's not an ideal situation for the poor fence lizard because it stores food in the tail, and the tail is helpful in balance and maneuverability. But if you consider the alternative, I guess it's preferable. Oh, plus, western fence lizards have 3 eyes. The 2 we're familiar with, and this creepy one on the top of its head. It's covered with a scale, And just what they use it for has always been a subject of debate. It's apparently for navigation. It has, as I say, it has a scale over it, but it can detect polarized light and sun direction. So the idea is that the fence lizard uses that third eye to help it figure out where it's going and where it wants to go, and so it can get back to its little nesting place. But the thing they're most famous for these days, and why they're our local heroes, well, these are all ticks that might otherwise be on us. They're on the western fence lizard. Now, ticks have 3 life stages. They have to take 3 blood meals as a larva, as a nymph, and then the females as adults to be able to lay eggs. And the ticks usually pick up Lyme disease with their first meal, which are mice or squirrels or even deer. However, if their second meal is a western fence lizard, that's the end of the Lyme disease. There's a protein in the lizard's blood that actually kills the spirochete bacteria right in the tick's gut. So when the tick falls off and we end up being a third meal, we don't get Lyme disease. And that's one of the big reasons that we got such a lower incidence of Lyme disease than the East Coast, because we've got western fence lizards as one of the hosts. I haven't seen statistics in a real long time, but I think for the specific tick, the black-legged deer tick that carries the Lyme disease, like Ixodes, 50 to 70% of those ticks on the East Coast have the Lyme disease. But here in the Bay Area, it's like in the single digits. I think it's just 1 or 2% here in the East Bay, and maybe 5 to 10% in the North Bay where they don't have quite as many fence lizards. So these guys are our heroes. And there's another hero in the fight against Lyme disease, or supposedly. It's the opossum. So, if you looked at these 2 guys, who's cute and cuddly and who's kind of gross? And, most people would say, oh, what a sweet looking raccoon. That's actually my water bottle that fell out, and I was too afraid to go try to get it back at the moment. Those of you that have encountered raccoons in your backyard or on camping trips know the truth. Those guys are surly. And they're a vector of rabies too. Possums we think of as being kind of gross because they do that playing possum thing. If they're scared of a predator, they actually do faint. Sometimes their bowels let go and gross stuff comes out of their mouth. That idea is that they will gross out any predator who will walk away. But it actually turns out that possums are about the cleanest animal that you'll ever want to see. Cleanest mammal. They make your cats look like slobs. These guys are always grooming themselves. And if they happen to have ticks on them, they'll pick the ticks off and eat them. They'll pick the ticks off and eat anybody eat the ticks off of any other opossum they're denning with or their babies. So some of the literature says they eat ticks, so they're great, which is true, but it's not like #1 food item. They don't go looking for them, they just don't tolerate them. And Liz, you've had some, I got so flustered there at the beginning, I didn't get to give Liz her proper, but one of our many things she does, she's a volunteer at the Lindsay Rehabilitation Hospital for Animals. And Liz, you've had some encounters with these 2 guys. What's your opinion?
Well, they're both, I more focus on the possums, and they're fantastic, really cute guys or gals at Lindsay. And so there's something that basically you should get to know more about the opossums, because they're just really great. I mean, they're just they can be very affectionate. With Lindsay, they're so fantastic because even medication, when we give them medication, they're so cooperative, because every time you get close to them and try to give them the medication, they'll kind of do that hissing. So they'll have their mouth open and no problem giving them the medication. The raccoons, I have had some encounters with those, with 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 a dog I had, and they're kind of in a pack. And if one is being threatened by another, like a dog or whatever, the other guys will come and defend that raccoon. So they are in packs and they can be pretty aggressive. That's my encounters with those two guys.
And on Mount Diablo and in the Marin Headlands, at the campsites, they have these bear lockers, they're called. So you can lock your food up. They're not for bears, they're for raccoons. And possums, well, if they get in your backyard, that's fine because they eat what we consider to be harmful insects, at least for your garden, and they keep the rodent population under control. And they don't get rabies, evidently. They have a lower body temperature than other mammals, and the rabies virus can't thrive in possums. So let's give some possums some love, even if it's not for eating ticks. After we've seen our fill at the pond, we kind of take our walk back, and there's one interesting landmark that we pass on the way. There's an old rusted tower. What could that possibly be used for? It wasn't for grain. And if any of you are railroad buffs, you might recognize it. That's the type of water tank they used to use to fill up steam engines. And this particular one used to reside in downtown Concord. And then the steam trains never went through downtown Concord anymore. And that tower was sitting there, and the landowner thought he had a use for it, the landowner at Mitchell Canyon. He bought the tower, he hauled it up to the hillside here. He attached some piping and a pump, and in the wintertime when Mitchell Creek was flowing, he'd pump water up into that tank and fill it up. Then in the summer, he would open up the valve and out would come the water through the pipe. And he had a very particular destination in mind. It wasn't to water the plants or to water the cattle. It was to fill a swimming pool down in Mitchell Canyon. This is exactly where you park today. This is where the parking lot is. Used to be the Mitchell Pool right up into the mid-1960s. And Liz and I actually know someone that took lessons there as a little girl in the Mitchell Pool. So on a 95-degree day, when you park in Mitchell Canyon, you can, well, you would, in the olden times, you could have just taken a dip in the pool. Well, after we dry ourselves off, now we've made it out to the Coulter Pond and back again, and we're ready to hike up Mitchell Canyon. There's the trailhead. I don't know if you can see it. It says fire danger today. I think it says high. It'll be there all summer unless they change it to extreme. Then, whoops. One of the first things as we early on in the trail, there's a kind of a big field on one side and a forest, and it's kind of important because there's a critter that lives up there that we sometimes see, usually very secretive. And Liz has a great story.
Yes. So one experience we had in one of our evening or late afternoon hikes is we were going from the pond and we were going to go up Mitchell Canyon. And we came across some people who said, oh, we just saw a mountain lion. And we were like, really? And they were telling us the location, which was this field that starts Mitchell Canyon. And we're like, oh, okay. And so we started walking to that direction. And what we came across was out in the field. Remember, they're shy of us. They don't want to, they kind of stay elusive. So, but it was a bobcat. So what we saw wasn't a mountain lion. So, and we got to experience it. It was right there out on the field, and we got to see it, but it totally stayed away from us. Just it stayed over by the trees.
And they're kind of from a distance, it's difficult to judge size. So Liz, what was a question that you'd ask somebody who claimed they just saw a mountain lion?
If it had a question, if they saw mountain lion, would
Yeah,
be the tail.
What would you ask? Yeah, you'd ask
The
them.
tail. What was the tail like? That would be one question. I don't know if there'd be another question.
That's usually good enough. They're Bobcat tails are bobbed. They're only a couple inches long. Mountain lion tails, they're over 3 feet long. They're as long as the body. But most mountain lion sightings, it turns out in the Bay Area, they're either house cats from a distance, or for some reason German shepherds. Yeah.
So the size and the tail.
Anyway, a little bit further on, it looks like we come across, there's actually a little tiny grove of trees, and they've all got these holes in them. And, gee, who's got a BB gun out here, a pellet gun, that's been taking target practice on Mount Diablo trees? Well, turns out the culprit is of the avian variety. It's this little bird, red-breasted sapsucker. It's a type of woodpecker, and what it does, it drills holes into trees, mostly oak trees, but others too, deep enough, tiny little holes to get the sap to start to run out. And as the sap runs out, that's what the bird licks up. Now the holes it makes are very tiny, and pretty soon the tree is able to get those plugged up. So usually it doesn't do any lasting damage to the tree. So the sapsucker has its fill and it flies off, but then it comes back maybe an hour or two later, because what's moved in after the bird is left, insects are attracted to the sap, and they're eating what's left of the sap, and the red-breasted sapsucker has dessert. It eats all those insects. So kind of a interesting, next time you see those tiny little holes, that's both the main course and dessert for the red-breasted sapsucker. And from sapsuckers to owls, you're on, Liz.
Ah, all right. So on Mount Diablo State Park, we have a number of different owls, as we have in the area. So owls are fantastic nocturnal animals, creatures. They are basically they call it parliament owls. If you find parliament owls, it means it's normally a family. Maybe there's some owlets in there, because normally owls are solitary. So once they're only socialized when they're owlets, mating, just very few times. Otherwise, they are totally solitary. Owls, you see well, first of all, the eyes. They cannot move their eyes in their eye sockets. So they have this really long neck vertebrae that they use to turn their head, and they could turn it 270 degrees. Another thing that owls have a great adaptation is their face is flatter. It's pretty flat. So it's like a satellite dish to catch, quote unquote, sound. So that's another thing that owls have. Of course, sound. What you're seeing in this picture, you see ear tufts. Those are not the ears. Those are just, they have ears, but they are holes. And with some of them, the ears are not symmetrical. They're to the side, and it's only certain species. I don't know, Ken, if you want to talk more about how that works with the ears being not equal on each side.
Okay, well, why don't we, let's see. Should we do which owl was this?
Okay, this is a great horned owl.
Should we do the sound?
And so, sure.
Well, Liz mentioned the ears. Their ears are crooked. The tufts aren't the ears. Here's one ear points up, it's higher on the head. One ear is lower, it points down. They hear in 3D. They asymmetric hearing. And the benefit is, even though they have great eyesight, they can't see when it's totally dark either. But they can hear a critter moving. And all they have to do is move their head from side to side and up and down and diagonal. And when the sound is the same in both ears, they know they're aimed exactly at their prey. And they take off, and as long as they keep the sound the same in both ears, they know they're headed directly towards it. They stick out the talons, and they grab what they were after, even without ever seeing it. Oops.
Okay. All right, so with the great horned owls, some other things about the great horned owl is their wings. As you can see, they're beautiful wings, and owls in general. They have little fringes or little feathers on the ends of their wings. And that actually helps them to fly silently or quietly. And because the air passes through that, it has very specific things. Plus, it has very broad wings. So basically, they're able to soar as opposed to flapping their wings. And of course, flapping wings means that there's more sound to them. So with them, they have excellent hearing. They could hear a little mouse squeak a half a mile away. And they are able to, they eat a variety of creatures, and they eat it whole. So they get everything, mice, other owls, birds, and even skunks. And in the past, we've had an owl wing that was basically it was licensed to somebody, and she basically had this owl wing for a number of years. And if you smelled that owl wing after so many years, you could still smell what its last meal was, which was a skunk. So once it eats whatever, a skunk or whatever, it doesn't digest the fur and the bones. So it comes out as pellets. And usually you use, see here, if you could see me here, it uses, you could use this little tweezer kind of thing here, if you could see it. And here's the pellet, which kind of looks like something else, but it's a pellet. It just regurgitates what it ate, the bones and the fur. And so you open it up, and what we do, because I'm a special ed teacher as well, what we do is we open these up. You can get these. You can find them also if you know where the owl is, the owl's nest or what have you. You can go ahead and you may come across on the ground some of the pellets, and you just take it apart and you kind of figure what it just ate with that. Speaking of nests, owls do not make their own nests. They use nests from other large birds. A lot of them also use rock outcrops, or a lot of people have now are making owl boxes. And also they use them, they'll find a nest also in buildings, a barn, etc. So these guys don't make their own nests, they find nests from others. Great horned owls also are very high in the food chain as far as birds go. They're very high up. We even had an incident where this last year where they had a nest over in the Pine Canyon area, and the peregrine falcons nest there. And they ended up, the thought was that, and there was some evidence of this, that they went after the peregrine's nest, the chicks. And so this year the chicks, it looks like they didn't make it through that particular thing. They're very, very powerful birds, very powerful. They're not the biggest birds. That's a great gray owl, but they are the most powerful. When they go and grab with their talons and the beak and everything, and they pounce down on the creature, they do it with extreme force.
They're known as the tigers of the night. Just to clarify, they eat skunk, but they don't swallow the skunk's whole. That's a little bit big. They eat some and then they hide it. And the reason they can eat skunks, they've got the great hearing and the great vision, and there's not much room left in the brain for olfactory senses. So they have virtually no sense of smell. So, yeah.
The barn owl. So these guys have the distinctive heart-shaped base, and I definitely, okay, go ahead and do the sound. Sorry. So you guys probably heard this sound around your neighborhoods of the barn owl. They're the ones that actually do the screeching, not the other owl we're going to talk about, which is the western screech owl. The barn owls do the screeching, and they're the ones that heart shape, and they definitely have that like satellite dish look on their face, the bigger head, smaller body. And pretty much that's what you hear in your backyards. They're all around in our area, and it's wonderful in the evening to hear them. So if there's anything you want to add to that, Ken?
Let's move on.
No? Okay, Screech Owl. So the Screech Owl, wonderful, one of my favorite birds. At first, when I was going walking Mitchell Canyon in the late afternoons, early evenings, dusk, I would hear this sound. And at first, I'm like, what is that sound? What does that call it? It's very calming, very cool if you hear it. And come to find out, it's the Screech Owl, the western Screech Owl. And these guys, as you heard, they don't screech. They have this kind of trill that seems to go faster. And I've read, it's kind of like a ping pong. So they have basically, they have that thing where you could see where it goes a lot faster. It's slow, the trill, and then it goes faster, like a ping pong. They say like a ping pong, if you were to hear it. I read that somewhere. So super, super cool. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy their smaller birds, their smaller owls, the owl family, and they are found on Mount Diablo State Park. Ken? The next one.
Wait a minute, Liz. Cryptic or aposematic coloration?
Are you gonna make the sound?
No, I'm waiting.
Okay, it's the common porwell.
No.
It's the common porwell. And these guys are just incredible nocturnal birds. And you see one there. And there, I think I see the little speaker thing. So we'll go ahead and. All right, so that's the common porwell, which is the smallest member of the nightjar family. And these guys are nocturnal. and they're about the size of a pine cone. And so when you're going up Mitchell Canyon in the late afternoon, early evening, you may come across one of these guys on the trail. And these guys, like I said, look like pine cones. And so when you're walking, it's starting to get a little dark and you're walking, and all of a sudden you think it's a pine cone, and all of a sudden it jumps. Well, these guys are pretty cool because first of all, they eat a lot of the insects. They're out there eating insects. They are one of the, you could say, true, what's equivalent to hibernation as far as birds, torpor. And so
Sorry.
it's okay. So they're one of the true hibernating birds. So they will get their, they will get there, and it was founded with the Lewis Clark expedition that they were actually doing a variation of hibernation. And Lewis actually, in, I believe it was 1804, in North Dakota, came across this porwheel. And porwheels are found everywhere from southern Canada to northern Mexico. And they found North Dakota and came across it and realized, wow, there's this bird that hibernates, or variation of hibernation. Well, scientists have found that these guys get their body temperature down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit when they hibernate, or equivalent to hibernation. And their oxygen levels go down by 90%. So that's pretty amazing for these guys. And as you heard the call, you hear the call basically during breeding season more, which is May through like September. And then after that, once the insects start to, there isn't that food source there for them, they kind of go into hibernation, or the equivalent to it. For it could be as weeks to as long as months, and they will go into some kind of old logs, a number of rocks, and they'll hide inside the rocks, something where they can hide while they are doing their hibernation. So, and then the call, you heard the poor will, it sounds like they're calling their name. And so they will call poor will, and if they're really close, you'll hear poor Willip, you'll hear like a little extra to it. So you know that these guys are closer. So they're pretty cool birds. Ken? Oh boy, we got bats on Mount Diablo State Park, but we don't have these guys. These vampire bats are more Central and South America. So these guys, we don't have to worry about these guys, but they go more for livestock and stuff. So we have 13 different species, about 13 different species of bats that go in and out of Mount Diablo State Park. Some of them are endangered. And these guys are cool because these guys are another ones that help control the insect population on Mount Diablo. And if you go there in the late afternoon on Mount Diablo and walk up Mitchell Canyon, once the sun is starting to set, when we do on our walk, there's a good chance we will come across a bat fluttering around. Most of them do. Some have other forms of getting the insects, but majority of them kind of have their own flight patterns. And so Ken, you want to talk about anything more about bats?
well, everybody knows it's echolocation is the big thing with bats, but it's, you know, it's not as easy as it seems catching food in the dark, because even though we don't hear the sound signals that they send out, their prey does, and it's loud. So some of the, for instance, some of the moths actually can send out their own signals to jam the bat's echolocation. Some moths have a particular echo that from a reflection off their body, and these moths don't taste good. So one poor moth of that species gets eaten, and then the bat learns. So somebody takes one for the team there, but the rest are left alone. And some of the bats, some of the moths, they'll just, when they detect that the sound waves from the bats, they'll just stop flapping and drop. So there's a number of, it's not as easy as it seems. This is, I believe, a pallid bat, and you hear blind as a bat. That's not true. Most of them have very good vision and very good hearing. And there's a whole group of bats that are loosely called whispering bats. They'll turn down the echolocation to a whisper, just to keep from crashing into anything, and they'll actually hunt by eyesight and by hearing. So we gotta double time it here. It's one of Liz's favorite plants that we see on Mitchell Canyon. What is it, Liz?
Pitcher sage, and it's beautiful. If you kind of rub your fingers on the leaves, you kind of feel it. Some people call it the smell, one of the smells of Mount Diablo State Park. And as you see here, they have beautiful flower kind of urns that come out this time of year. And anything else, Ken, you want to say about the pitcher sage?
It's not for many of the baseball pitchers. It's because the seed pods look like little water urns or vases.
Poison oak. We are here. All right, so we have some poems here. Well, one in particular right now. So we have was it green in the summer, red in the fall, in the winter, no leaves at all. And of course I said leaves of 3, let it be. Green in the summer, red in the fall, and in the winter, no leaves at all.
You remember the other one?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Leaves of 3. If it's hairy, it's that one there.
Leaves of 3, let it be.
Leaves of 3, let it be. If it's hairy, it's a berry. If it's shiny, watch your hiney. That's the other one.
And with the drought, poison oak is drought sensitive. And some of the poison oak on Mount Diablo, it's already losing its leaves because of the dry year. So you don't have to wait till autumn to see the red color. Another plant we see in Mitchell Canyon, there's grape. There's wild grape, Vitis californica. I mean, they're edible, but it's mostly seed. And there actually used to be wineries in Clayton, and there were vineyards, and I believe they used the native rootstock, and they grafted on commercial varieties of grapes. So the wineries are gone, but those rootstocks, the natives, have spread up Mitchell Canyon. And I think they were really helped by the fire in 1977 when the firefighting equipment drove back and forth up the canyon here carrying the seeds. So it's really proliferated. Here's, the creek is dry now. This is all wild grape. In some areas, it's just overwhelming the other native vegetation. You can recognize the California sagebrush, the Artemisia. I had a time figuring out what this thing is, trying to stick its way out of the wild grape, and it was wild rose. And later in the year, you actually get the little rose hips that are edible, but they're mostly seed, and they're packed with vitamin C. So a lot of things could happen to you on a Greenbelt Alliance outing, but you're not going to get scurvy. But the most famous plant is this one. And we've all seen it probably, soaproot or amole. But, and you usually see it growing in clumps. I call it the survival plant, and the kids all call it the grocery store plant because it has so many uses. So here's a hypothetical for you. Say you're not in a park, state park, a regional park, anywhere, you're just out on the hillside, you manage to get yourself lost and you're in trouble. Well, first thing you'd want to do is search for some of these soaproots. And you'd have to get a stick and kind of dig them out from underground, which isn't the disaster you think it is. This is the bulb, but attached to it is little bulbules that stay in the ground. And once this one is pulled out, the other ones start to sprout. But anyway, let's say you're lost out in the great outback, and you've collected a few of these. Well, you want to start to peel a couple of them and take off the fibers and the coating on the bulb. Don't throw it away. You want to save them. But if you could start a fire, maybe you got 2 Boy Scouts handy, rub them together and see what it gives, and cook the bulb, you'd have something to eat. Supposedly it tastes like a potato or an onion. So it'd be lost, but you have something to eat. If you're near a source of water, as you're peeling the bulb, there's a sticky white substance on the bulb. It's got a chemical called saponin in it, a sudsing agent. So if you're near water, you can lather up, just like a soap, and that's where the name comes from. So you'd be lost, but you'd be clean. But if you're gonna wash your hair, you need to rinse your hair out really well, because once that soap dries, it turns into a glue. Then you'd be looking like Bigfoot and you never would get rescued. But kind of the traditional use what the Native Americans would do with the fibers on the outside and that glue is soap plant brushes. So here's the bulb and here's the finished project. And there's various, I think the East Bay Regional Park District, once they get going again out in Coyote Hills, they occasionally give a soap plant brush workshop. That juice that's also good for the soap and the glue, it's supposedly a good salve for poison oak, which you probably got if you're lost. A few of the bulbs you'll want to grind up and toss into a pond. The saponin in the bulb, it clogs up the fish's gills. It inhibits the uptake of oxygen. So they come floating to the surface stupefied. So you can go fishing with the soap plant. And I'm sure there's several other uses that I've forgotten, and for sake of time, I won't try to remember at this point. But you know, for our outing at the solstice, the most delightful thing is they're in flower in late May right through June. And the scientific, the species name pomeridianum, post-meridian, afternoon. These things open up in around 6 or 6:30 in the evening. They're closed all day. They stay open all night and they close in the morning. So who could pollinate them? Well, no doubt they're visited by night-flying beetles and moths, but it turns out the main pollinator for soaproot are native bumblebees. It's the very last thing in the day that the bumblebees, in the evening, that the bumblebees visit before they call it a day and turn into snooze. So soaproot is bumblebee pollinated. So it's quite attractive along the trail, but just a word of caution, there's a lot of interesting stuff, but yeah, that's poison oak, so don't go sticking your face in there to take a picture. Mike and Ruth Ann have the right idea. Okay, so we made it all the way down. We're gonna double time it on the way back there. We're right here. And the last, when we did our Garden of the Jungle Gods, I gave a critique on the state park trail signs, which aren't the greatest. The name of the trail are the little words, but you turn up White Canyon here towards Black Point, and then probably 50 yards, you'll see the Globe Lily Trail. And we'll turn right there and head back. And Globe Lily Trail is really pretty, little narrow footpath after being on a wide fire road. Yeah, this is little Emmeline. She's just learning to walk there. She's in junior high now, so we've been doing this a long time. And some great views as the sunset moves on. And the one tree, the one pine tree we've been seeing all the way up the canyon and then down back on the trail is this one. And this is one where it pays to learn the Latin name, if not the Native American name, which would even be better. Pinus sibyniana, named by David Douglas, who was the first one to collect and scientifically identify it. It's a drought pine tree, a drought adapted pine tree with roots that can go down almost 100 feet to get to water. It's notorious for having the second heaviest pine cone of any pine tree in the world. You'll never find a picnic bench under one of these pine trees, foothill pines on Mount Diablo. It do some real damage. Why the cones get so big, one idea is since it's a drought tree and trying to get started and having to live in such difficult conditions, with bigger cones, you could have bigger seeds. And that gives the little sprout more food to get started. They tend to grow crooked. And one idea is that's when the pine cones drop, if they don't bonk you on the head, they'll roll downhill some distance away from the parent tree and not try to get established too close, which makes a lot of sense unless you, provided you don't all end up in the same place. Foothill pines, they've been described as a drunken forest, staggering their way up a chaparral-covered hillside. And kind of sparse foliage, another name for it is ghost tree. This is not the tree you want to stop to try to find shade under on a hot day. And even though these are drought adapted, there's only so much they can take. And after several years of drought, they're in trouble. Now that fire in 1977 was after several years of drought, and a lot of the Coulter and these foothill pines had died. And we're kind of in the same situation this year. Now, the tree's big defense against mistletoe and bark beetles that would burrow in and kill the tree is resin. That's kind of the tree's antiseptic. It's the sticky substance they produce to seal the breaches, little nicks in the tree. But they need water to do that. And after several years of drought, they can't make resin. And that's where the trouble starts. So here's the resin. This tree's got some issues here, so it's trying to seal itself up. And here's some mistletoe getting started. The tree is trying, but without much success. And this thing really takes off, the mistletoe, during a drought. And unlike the kissing mistletoe that we find on broadleaf trees, the oak mistletoe, which is not good for the tree, but it's very valuable for the environment for several critters that depend on it. It's only a partial parasite. It's green, it can photosynthesize. It just steals some water and minerals from the tree. The pine mistletoe is a total parasite. I've never heard anybody say anything good about it. So anyway, we'll have to take a look. It's, given that the trees are in trouble at this point, if we don't get a rainy winter. The interesting thing about this dwarf mistletoe is the way it reproduces. It produces seeds that are filled with water. It steals water all spring and all summer from the tree. And in late summer and in fall, they're all plumped up and they explode. It's called dehiscence. And they shoot out the seed. And somebody with a lot of time on their hands, they actually did a study. When these things explode, and actually it's an internal mechanism, it's kind of fascinating. The mitochondria in the cells go through a reaction where they give off heat and warm up the inside, so the water expands a few degrees and explodes. But somebody timed that, and they calculated that it shoots out at 25 meters per second initially. And I did the math, converted from the metric, I probably messed this up. Somebody will have to do it, and then on the chat. I think that's about 100. That comes out to 100 kilometers per hour, or 62 miles per hour is what they shoot out initially, and they can shoot out 20 meters. That's over 60 feet, right to another tree. Or if you happen to be walking by and disturb them and brush up against them, they're all over you, and they have the consistency of little boogers. So yeah, just beware. Don't shake hands with dwarf mistletoe, even if Liz or I invite you to as a joke, because everybody in the group will be covered with these things. And here's a tree that where the infection's pretty far along. These are actually called witch's brooms. That's dwarf mistletoe plus some abnormal growths in the tree caused by the mistletoe. So we'll continue up the trail. We get to see some of our native bunch grasses, and we talked about that before with the Garden of the Jungle Gods. Note, even though we're in the middle of a terrible drought, these guys are still green in the middle. They've got those very, very deep roots. And in amongst the native grasses, they're starting to appear are these ominous looking burrows. What could possibly live in there? Well, this fellow thought he knew. He visited in 1861 William Brewer, a scientist with the California Geologic Survey. He saw what lived in there. He said it was the size of a half-grown mouse with fangs the size of a rattlesnake's and a bite generally considered fatal. Pleasant traveling companions. We'll find out next month. And just one more plant and we're done. And it's one you might just walk by and not notice. It's this one, kind of a palish green, kind of nondescript. It's called Fremont's bushmallow, named for John C. Fremont, the Pathfinder, the man who named the Golden Gate, who was instrumental for good or bad in the Bear Flag Revolt, our first state senator. He did a number of topographic expeditions for the Army Corps early in his career, and his scout was Kit Carson, was there. Kit Carson, kept him out of trouble mostly, but not always. This plant is a fire follower. It blooms only after a fire. In this case, this bloomed after the 1977 fire, and the whole hillside was covered with them. There are 2 left. What happens is the seeds of Fremont's bushmallow are in the soil, and they're waiting for fire. And when there's a fire that clears the hillside, it cracks the seeds. The smoke from the fire and the leachates stimulate growth. There's a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus from everything that burned in the soil. And that's the cue for these guys to sprout. And we're lucky enough when we do our walk to time it, that we see the flowers. They're quite attractive little flowers. Well, there's 2 left on this side of the mountain since the fire in 1977. Because what happens, the chaparral makes a comeback and it simply crowds these little guys out. So there's 2 left. They're almost gone. The whole hillside used to be covered. And if you can make it to our outing next year, well, they'll still be there next year. I don't know how much longer after that. But remember, the seeds are in the soil. So when they're just waiting for the next fire, which is kind of inevitable. And of course, fire in wildland, isn't bad. It's part of nature. And the trick is we need to have fire resilient communities. Like from the lessons of Twin Peaks, we got to be careful where we build and how we build. And that's what you'll want to sign up for our white paper rollout next month. So I think that's it. Sorry, we ran a little long, thanks to my bungling at the start. Well, and I know we had mentioned scorpions. We'll save that for next time when we figure out what scared William Brewer so much. It wasn't scorpions. Jesse?
Great. Thank you,
Yella?
Ken and Liz. I did have one question come in. So for those of you who want to stick around for that, Susan asked, Liz, this one's for you, I think. Do these various owls screech at a certain time of day or night? What is the communication for?
The ones that screech are the barn owls. And they do it when my understanding, when they are looking when prey or what have you, or others, if others are coming around in their territory. I don't know if Ken, you know any more about that?
Yeah, it's all those things. Yeah. It's been a screech owl on my block for a while, about a month ago.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you everyone again for staying over. This was such a great presentation, and we really hope that you can take the information you learned today and head out to Mount Diablo and explore the trails and the critters and the plants in the evening hours when it's cooler for sure. And as Ken mentioned earlier, we have created breakthrough research to come up with bold actions and creative solutions urgently needed to protect our communities from yet another extreme wildfire season. So I would like to invite you to join us on June 22nd at 4 p.m. for a new view of Greenbelt's Wildfire Protection and Preparedness. This is a virtual launch of our research on the critical role of Greenbelt in wildfire resilience. And I'm going to go ahead and share that link to sign up for the event in the chat for those of you who are interested. There you go. And a friendly reminder that we did record this session. We will send it in a follow-up email to you, which should land in your inbox later today. If for some reason you don't get that email, you can also find the recording on our website under events and then past events. Again, that will be posted later today. And I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. We hope you're able to celebrate Juneteenth today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.